I'm the Director of Advocacy here at the Shepherd Center. This October will be my 30th anniversary. Some people, I describe it as stirring, connecting from public policy to public protest. I got recruited by the rehab that I was rehabbed in to come back and be a counselor for newly injured, do group stuff, sexuality stuff, the gamut of counseling. And I told the administrator then that I'd be happy to do that for a year, but I would like to sit down with him after that in that year and talk to him. And what I began to realize was I could be the greatest counselor there was, but most of the problems were externally. It was building codes, it was public policy, it was the lack of support systems. Back then there wasn't any such thing as a van-only parking place. Right? There wasn't any such thing as a ramp or a lift on a bus, meaning a public bus. There wasn't anything as like beach matting over the soft sand. So after a year, he brought me to his office as we agreed, and we had a conversation. He said, "Well, what are you proposing?" I said, "Well, how about if I half-time counseling to pay for my job, because they need to generate revenue, and half-time a community education." And so I got involved at that time in setting up an independent living center, setting up not just support groups, but support groups that did advocacy. Back then it was the National Paraplegia Foundation. Now it's National Spinal Cord Injury Association, which is part of United Spinal, whatever. But it was a support group initially. And we had the 3 C's, care, curing, coping. And so we focused on the coping. And that meant everything from trying to make things more accessible physically, trying to create more support systems, trying to change public attitudes. Back then it was all right to call me confined to a chair. Back then it was all right to call me handicapped. And what I began to realize was I don't want to be confined. My chair is a means of mobility. Am I disabled? Sure. Are there things I can't do? Sure. But that doesn't make me less than something. And so advocacy, some was back to that claiming your identity, being involved. Don't wait for people to change things. You are the expert. You have to be involved in changing things. And sometimes that means getting in people's face. So I was involved in starting a group called ADAPT back in '83. And it took us 7 years to finally get, as part of the Americans with Disabilities Act, to get the ADA passed where it would say every new bus bought in the country will be accessible to everybody. But that was a 7-year campaign that involved a whole lot of things, including public protests. So I've blocked buses, I've chained myself to things, I've done sit-ins, I've spent 3 nights in a Phoenix jail. Still makes me nervous every time I protest now. I mean, there's a whole lot of protests going on in the country as me and you are having this interview related to cuts and caps to Medicaid, a very important funding stream for home community-based services. And so, we could sit back as the people who are different and say, you know what's best for us, or we can say, I know what's best for me and I need to be involved. When people ask me about advocacy, I say, have you ever taken anything back? Say you went to a local, like a Target or something, and you weren't pleased with the product you bought. And so you had to take it back to the customer service, say, hey, I'm returning this because it's not what I thought it was, or it doesn't work right. I said, well, that's a form of advocacy. Now you just need to make it more personal. And it's real hard, back to the identity issue, it's real hard for people, I think, people are reluctant, I think, to do much advocacy about themselves because they're not comfortable with themselves yet. And when you do advocacy, you bring a lot of attention to yourself. And if you're not comfortable with self yet, you tend to resist advocacy.